In a battle against a powerful corporation, a young boy's art becomes the voice of countless families whose lives were destroyed. This is a story of resilience, justice, and the courage to stand up for what's right. As the courtroom buzzed with tense anticipation, Jason, a 10-year-old boy, found himself at the center of a fight that was bigger than any child should face. His simple drawings, capturing the pain and strength of families ravaged by a corporation's negligence, became an unshakable force that spoke louder than words ever could. With each tear-filled testimony, the truth about Keller Corporation's destructive actions slowly unfolded. But it was Jason's art that finally shook the foundation of power and privilege, uniting a broken community. Now, as they awaited justice, the question remained: could one child's vision really change everything? And would they finally get the justice they deserved? Before we dive deeper into this gripping story, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, Epic Story Moments, yet, now is the perfect time. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update, and be the first to hear our incredible news stories. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support more heartwarming tales like this. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. The marble columns of the courthouse loomed high, casting long shadows over the crowd that had gathered for the most anticipated case of the year. Inside Courtroom 7, every wooden bench creaked under the weight of anxious families and eager reporters. Their whispers filled the air, almost as if the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Judge Melissa Whitman sat on her elevated bench, her black robes crisp and perfect, her expression cold and unwavering, as harsh and unforgiving as the winter morning outside. Her steely gray eyes scanned the crowded room with practiced indifference. She had earned the nickname, the Ice Queen, over the years, a title she wore like armor, cultivated through her unflinching dedication to the law. Today, nothing would be different. All rise, the bailiff called out. The Superior Court of the 3rd District is now in session. The Honorable Judge Melissa Whitman presiding. Andrew Keller, the lead attorney for Keller Corporation, stood at the plaintiff's table, his expensive suit gleaming under the fluorescent courtroom lights. His confident smile never wavered as he meticulously arranged his papers, occasionally glancing up at the gathered crowd of families he was trying to evict. His interest in them was lukewarm, as if they were a mere inconvenience to his plans. "Your Honor," Keller began, his voice smooth as silk, "Keller Corporation has legally acquired the properties in question. The residents were given proper notice according to state law. Their continued presence is unlawful and damaging to our redevelopment plans." Jason Whitman, a 10-year-old boy, sat unnoticed in the back row. His small hands clutched a worn sketchbook, his knuckles white with tension. Every few minutes, he would wipe his palms on his threadbare jeans, his eyes darting between the judge and the man whose plans would tear down his home. The courtroom seemed indifferent to his presence, but his mind was sharply focused on the details unfolding before him. "The property values in this area have been depressed for years," Keller continued, gesturing toward a series of charts displayed on an easel. "Our development project will revitalize the neighborhood, create hundreds of jobs, and bring prosperity to all. It's an opportunity none of us can afford to miss." A woman in the gallery couldn't contain her grief. "But where will our children sleep?" she cried, her voice breaking under the weight of her desperation. Judge Whitman's gavel crashed down with a resounding thud. "Order in the court," she commanded sharply. "Another outburst like that, and you'll be removed from this room." Jason flinched at the sound of the gavel, the sharp noise sending a ripple of discomfort through his chest. His pencil made an accidental mark across his drawing. The young boy, though small and silent, was documenting the scene before him. He sketched the judge's stern face, the worried expressions of the families, and the smug smile on Mr. Keller's face. His pencil moved swiftly, capturing the details others might overlook. The trembling hands of a mother clutching her baby, the tired lines etched into the face of an elderly man, and the way Keller's smile never quite reached his eyes. "The law is clear on this matter," Keller pressed, his voice dripping with false sympathy. While we understand the emotional attachment these people may have to their homes, progress cannot be halted by sentiment. These residents have no legal right to remain here. Melissa Whitman's face remained neutral, but her eyes briefly flicked toward the back of the room. For just a second, she noticed a small boy sitting alone, his head bent over something in his lap. The sight of his solitary figure tugged at her conscience. She pushed the feeling aside, reminding herself that emotions had no place in her courtroom. "Mr. Keller," she spoke, her voice carrying across the room, "please proceed with your evidence of proper notification to the residents." As Keller continued his polished presentation, Jason's pencil moved faster, capturing the fear and hope he saw in the faces around him. His small shoulders hunched forward, trying to make himself invisible, yet his eyes missed nothing. His thoughts lingered on his mother, whose absence left a hole in his heart that nothing could fill. But now, he faced another threat, another piece of his world, teetering on the brink of destruction. Keller's words continued to flow like honey, as he described the many benefits his corporation would bring to the area. The new development will include state-of-the-art facilities, he explained, pointing to architectural renderings of manicured lawns and gleaming buildings. Property values will triple within 5 years. Jason's hand trembled as he gripped his pencil tighter. His chest felt tight as he listened to Keller talk about a future that would erase everything he had ever known. The same man whose name he had seen on the papers as mother had been reading the night before she died. Something inside the young boy snapped. He couldn't stay quiet anymore. Standing up on shaky legs, Jason's voice rang out, clear and strong, despite his fear. "Stop lying." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters spun in their seats, cameras flashing. The families being evicted began murmuring loudly, some even standing up in protest. Andrew Keller's polished expression cracked, just for a moment, before he regained his composure. Judge Whitman's gavel crashed down again, the sharp noise cutting through the chaos like a knife. "Order! Order in the court!" Her voice rang out, commanding silence. The room gradually quieted, every eye now fixed on the small boy standing in the back row. "Young man," Melissa said sternly, her voice cutting through the silence, "approach the bench immediately." Jason's legs felt weak as he walked to the front, his sketchbook clutched tightly to his chest. There was something about his determined walk, the set of his jaw, that stirred memories in the judge. Memories she had long buried. Memories she had worked so hard to forget. "What is your name?" she demanded, her voice cold as she looked down at him from her elevated position. The boy lifted his chin, meeting her gaze directly. "Jason Whitman," he answered clearly, his voice echoing in the now silent courtroom. The room held its breath. What did this boy know? What truth could he possibly hold that would shatter everything? As Judge Whitman stared at him, something inside her stirred. The boy's revelation would force her to confront a past she had spent years trying to forget, a past tied to the very corporation that now threatened to destroy everything Jason held dear. And the stakes were higher than anyone could have imagined, because what was at risk wasn't just a verdict, but redemption. The truth was about to come out. The marble columns of the courthouse loomed tall and imposing as the crowd gathered for one of the most anticipated cases of the year. Inside Courtroom 7, every wooden bench creaked under the weight of anxious families and reporters, their hushed conversations swirling like rustling leaves in the air. Judge Melissa Whitman sat upright on her elevated bench, her black robes pristine and unwrinkled, her face as cold and unyielding as the winter morning outside. Her steely gray eyes surveyed the room with practiced indifference. Known as the Ice Queen for her unflinching devotion to the letter of the law, she had earned her nickname over years of maintaining an unshakable composure. Today, she was ready for another routine case, or so she thought. Asterisk, all rise. Asterisk, the bailiff called, signaling the start of the proceedings. The Superior Court of the 3rd District was now in session, the Honorable Judge Melissa Whitman presiding. Andrew Keller strolled confidently to the plaintiff's table, his expensive suit gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. His smile never faltered as he arranged his papers with precision. Occasionally, he glanced at the gallery filled with families who faced eviction, his target audience, as if their suffering was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Asterisk, Your Honor, asterisk, Keller began, his voice smooth and confident. Asterisk, Keller Corporation has legally acquired the properties in question. The residents were given proper notice according to state law. Their continued presence is unlawful and damaging to our redevelopment plans, asterisk. At his words, a murmur rippled through the crowd. A woman in the gallery stood, her voice cracking with emotion. Asterisk, but where will our children sleep? Asterisk. The sound of the gavel echoed through the room. Asterisk, order in the court. Asterisk, Judge Whitman commanded, her voice sharp as a blade. Asterisk, another outburst like that, and you'll be removed from this courtroom, asterisk. Jason Whitman, a 10-year-old boy, sat at the back of the courtroom, a small sketchbook clenched tightly in his hands. His knuckles were white from the pressure. Every few moments, he wiped his palms nervously on his threadbare jeans, his eyes darting between the judge and the man who threatened to tear his home apart. Asterisk, the property values in this area have been depressed for years, asterisk, Keller continued, glancing at the charts behind him. Asterisk, our development project will revitalize the neighborhood, create hundreds of jobs. Asterisk, his words were rehearsed, smooth as honey, but Jason was too focused on the grim reality to listen. He had seen it all before. His mother had talked about these very plans before she passed away. Jason's pencil moved rapidly across the paper, sketching the scene unfolding before him. The judge's stern face, the worried families, and Keller's arrogant smile. His small hands captured details others missed. The tremor in a mother's hands as she held her baby, the deep lines of weariness etched on an old man's face, and the way Keller's smile never quite reached his eyes. Asterisk, the law is clear on this matter, asterisk, Keller pressed, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Asterisk, we understand the emotional attachment these people have to their homes, but progress cannot be halted for sentiment. These residents have no legal right to remain, asterisk. Judge Whitman maintained her mask of neutrality, but her eyes caught a flicker of movement at the back of the room. For a brief moment, she noticed a small boy sitting alone, head bent over something in his lap. Something about him, about the solitude he seemed to carry, tugged at her conscience. But she quickly suppressed the thought. She had long ago learned that emotions had no place in her courtroom. Asterisk, Mr. Keller, asterisk, she said, her voice cool and controlled. Asterisk, please proceed with your evidence of proper notification to the residents, asterisk. Keller continued, his presentation detailing the benefits of the redevelopment. Gleaming buildings, manicured lawns, property values that would triple in 5 years. But in the back of the courtroom, Jason's hand trembled, his chest tight as he listened to the words that threatened to destroy his world. This wasn't just a redevelopment. This was a future without the only home he'd ever known. A future without his mother, the woman who had been taken from him too soon. Something inside Jason snapped. He couldn't stay silent any longer. With trembling legs, he stood and, despite his fear, his voice rang out clear and strong. Asterisk, stop lying. Asterisk, the courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters spun in their seats, cameras flashing. Families murmured loudly, some standing in protest. Even Andrew Keller's composed expression faltered for a moment before he regained control. Judge Whitman's gavel came down repeatedly, the sharp sound cutting through the noise. Asterisk, order. Order in the court. Asterisk, her voice rang out, slicing through the chaos like a knife. Gradually, the room quieted. All eyes turned to the small boy standing at the back of the room, his small frame unwavering despite the tension around him. Asterisk, young man, asterisk, Judge Whitman said, her voice stern but controlled. Asterisk approached the bench immediately, asterisk. Jason walked forward slowly, his sketchbook clutched tightly to his chest. Melissa's eyes followed him, narrowing in concentration. Something about the way he walked, about the set of his jaw, stirred memories buried deep within her. She couldn't place it at first, But then, as he came closer, a shocking realization dawned on her. "What is your name?" she demanded, her voice a sharp command. "Asterisk Jason Whitman, asterisk," he replied, his voice echoing in the silence of the room. The color drained from Melissa's face. Her hands, always steady, began to tremble. The gavel she had been holding slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the bench. For the first time in her career, the Ice Queen was rattled. The reporters leaned forward, scribbling furiously in their notepads. The shared last name had not gone unnoticed, and the judge's reaction made it clear. This was no coincidence. Andrew Keller watched the scene unfold with a calculating gaze, his mind already working on how to use this unexpected development to his advantage. Melissa's throat tightened. She could barely speak. All she could do was stare at the boy, her grandson. Her mind raced. This was Jason, the son of her estranged daughter, the same daughter she had pushed away years ago, the same daughter whose funeral she had been too ashamed to attend just a year ago. The revelation hit her like a punch to the gut. Asterisk, this court is adjourned for the day. Asterisk, Melissa announced abruptly, her voice hoarse. Asterisk, we will reconvene tomorrow at 9:00 a.m. Asterisk. She turned to the bailiff. Asterisk, please ensure that young Mr. Whitman remains in the courtroom. Everyone else is dismissed. Asterisk. The room buzzed with excited whispers as the crowd filed out. Reporters huddled in small groups, speculating about the connection between the stern judge and the young boy who had caused the disruption. Andrew Keller lingered for a moment, watching Jason with newfound interest before his lawyer ushered him out of the room. Jason stood alone in front of the bench, still clutching his sketchbook, his courage waning as uncertainty crept in. His heart pounded in his chest as he waited, wondering if this would be the moment he finally found his grandmother, the woman his mother had spoken of in her final days. Melissa's chambers felt unerringly quiet as Jason sat across from her, his small body curled up in one of the leather chairs. His worn sneakers barely touched the floor. His backpack and sketchbook were held tightly against his chest like shields. Melissa poured a glass of water and placed it in front of him, her hands shaking. She had imagined this moment countless times, dreaming of seeing her daughter again, of making amends. But never like this, never with a small boy carrying such heavy news. Asterisk, where's your mother, Jason? Asterisk, she asked softly, though deep down, she already knew the answer. Jason's lip trembled, and he looked down at his shoes. Asterisk, Mom died last year. Asterisk, he whispered. Asterisk, she got really sick, really fast. The doctors couldn't help her. Asterisk. Melissa sank into her chair, her legs too weak to hold her up. The weight of her regret hit her like a tidal wave. All the years she had wasted, all the chances she had missed to make things right, were gone forever. Asterisk, I've been staying in different places. Asterisk, Jason continued, wiping his eyes. Asterisk, sometimes with friends from Mom's old building. Sometimes. Wherever I can find a spot. Asterisk. Tears welled up in Melissa's eyes. Her carefully maintained composure cracked. Asterisk, why didn't anyone tell me? Why didn't you come to me sooner? Asterisk. Jason hesitated before pulling a crumpled envelope from his backpack. Asterisk, Mom wrote this for you before she died. She made me promise to find you and give it to you myself. She said it was really important. Asterisk. Melissa took the envelope with trembling hands, recognizing her daughter's handwriting. Mom scrawled on the front in unsteady letters. She opened it carefully and began to read. Asterisk, dear Mom, if you're reading this, then Jason has found you and I'm no longer here. I'm so sorry we never made things right between us. That's my fault as much as yours. Pride runs strong in our family, doesn't it? But this letter isn't about our past. It's about why I won't have a future. I've been working in accounting at Keller Corporation for the past 3 years. 6 months ago, I discovered something terrible. They've been dumping toxic chemicals in poor neighborhoods. People are getting sick. Children are dying. I gathered evidence and documented everything. When they found out what I knew, things started happening. Strange accidents, threats. Now I'm sick, and the doctors can't explain why. But I know Keller knows I know, and they're making sure I can't talk. Please, Mom, protect Jason. And if you can, finish what I started. The evidence is asterisk. Melissa's hands shook so violently she could barely hold the paper. Her eyes moved from the letter to Jason, who was watching her with eyes so much like his mother's. Asterisk, please help me, asterisk, Jason whispered, his voice barely audible. Asterisk, Mom said you always fought for what was right, even when it was hard. She said that's why you became a judge, asterisk. Jason pulled his sketchbook closer. Asterisk, I have drawings. Things I saw at Mom's work. Things she showed me before, asterisk. Melissa glanced down at the sketchbook. Jason had drawn industrial containers behind a chain-link fence. The details were astonishing for a 10-year-old, and the precision of the drawings caught Melissa's eye. Serial numbers, warning labels, and dates. Asterisk, your mother taught you to notice things. Asterisk, Melissa said softly. Jason nodded without looking up. Asterisk, she said sometimes the most important stuff is in the little details that nobody else pays attention to. Asterisk, outside her chambers, Melissa could hear the buzz of reporters in the hallway, their voices carrying through the heavy wooden door. Fragments of speculation about the dramatic scene that had just unfolded in her courtroom. Speculation about Judge Whitman's connection to the brave young boy who had come forward with a truth that would change everything. As the courtroom buzzed with hushed whispers, Melissa felt the blood drain from her face. For the first time in her long career, the icy demeanor she was known for faltered. Her hands, usually steady and composed, trembled ever so slightly as she watched the young boy across the room. The gavel she had been holding slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly against the wooden surface of her bench. The sound echoed through the room, a sharp contrast to the quiet tension that followed. Melissa's heart raced, but she forced herself to maintain control. The reporters leaned forward, their pencils scratching furiously across notepads. The connection between the young boy and herself had not gone unnoticed. The shared last name, the way the boy stood there, staring up at her with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. It was clear this was no coincidence. Andrew Keller, seated in the courtroom, watched the unfolding scene with calculating eyes. His mind was already racing, strategizing how he could turn this unexpected development to his advantage. Melissa's throat felt dry as she turned her gaze toward Jason, her grandson, the child of her estranged daughter, the one she had pushed away so many years ago, the same daughter whose funeral she had been too ashamed to attend just 1 year ago. For a moment, all the weight of her decisions pressed down on her. This court is adjourned for the day, Melissa announced abruptly, her voice tinged with a hoarseness she couldn't hide. We will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. She turned to the bailiff, her mind already racing. Please ensure that young Mr. Whitman remains in the courtroom. Everyone else is dismissed. As the crowd began to file out, their excited whispers filled the air. Reporters huddled in groups, speculating about the connection between the stern judge and the boy who had just boldly stood in front of her. Andrew Keller lingered, watching Jason with newfound interest, but his lawyer ushered him out of the courtroom before any more attention could be drawn to the boy. Jason, on the other hand, remained standing, clutching his sketchbook tightly to his chest. The earlier courage he had shown was now replaced with uncertainty. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears. Had he finally found what he had been searching for all this time? His grandmother, the woman his mother had always told him about in her final days. The judge, who had been so distant, so unreachable, now stood before him, her eyes fixed on him in a way that made him wonder if she recognized the depth of the connection between them. Melissa watched as Jason settled into one of the leather chairs across from her desk, looking small and fragile in the oversized chair. His worn sneakers barely touched the floor, and his backpack and sketchbook were pressed tightly against his chest, as if they could somehow shield him from the gravity of the moment. She reached for the glass of water she had poured earlier, her hands shaking as she placed it in front of him. Over the years, She had imagined this moment countless times, reuniting with her daughter, seeking to make amends for the mistakes she had made. But never like this. Never with a small boy carrying such heavy news. "Where's your mother, Jason?" Melissa asked softly, though deep down, she already knew the answer. Jason's lower lip trembled as he glanced down at his shoes. "Mom died last year," he whispered, his voice cracking. "She got really sick, really fast. The doctors couldn't help her." Melissa felt her legs give way, and she sank into her chair, her whole body weighed down by regret. The years of missed opportunities, the chances to make things right now gone forever. "I've been staying at different places," Jason continued, his voice trembling as he wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "Sometimes with friends from Mom's old building. Sometimes just wherever I can find a spot." Tears welled up in Melissa's eyes, the carefully crafted walls around her heart crumbling. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" Jason unzipped his backpack with trembling fingers, pulling out a wrinkled envelope. "Mom wrote this for you before she died," he said, holding it out. "She made me promise to find you and give it to you myself. She said it was really important." Melissa took the letter from his hand, her heart pounding as she recognized her daughter's handwriting. It was unsteady, but unmistakable. "Mom" spelled out on the front. With shaking fingers, she opened it and began to read aloud. "Dear Mom, if you're reading this, then Jason has found you, and I'm no longer here. I'm so sorry we never made things right between us. That's my fault as much as yours. Pride runs strong in our family, doesn't it? But this letter isn't about our past. It's about why I won't have a future. I've been working in accounting at Keller Corporation for the past 3 years. 6 months ago, I discovered something terrible. They've been dumping toxic chemicals in poor neighborhoods, Mom. People are getting sick. Children are dying. I gathered evidence, documented everything. When they found out what I knew, things started happening. Strange accidents, threats. Now I'm sick, and the doctors can't explain why. But I know. Keller knows I know, and they're making sure I can't talk. Please, Mom, protect Jason. And if you can, finish what I started. The evidence is..." Melissa's hands trembled so badly that she could barely hold the paper. She looked up at Jason, who was watching her with wide, desperate eyes. "Please help me," Jason pleaded softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom said you always fought for what was right, even when it was hard. She said that's why you became a judge." She swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling over her like a heavy fog. "I'll help you, Jason," Melissa said, her voice steady but filled with a newfound determination. "We'll finish what your mom started, together." As she glanced at the letter again, she realized the magnitude of what this would mean for her. Taking on Keller Corporation with all its power and influence was a risk. It could cost her everything. The career she had worked for, the respect she had earned, her position on the bench. But in this moment, as she looked at Jason, her heart told her that this was the right thing to do. "I've got to file emergency custody papers," she said abruptly, standing up and making the call to her clerk. "Cancel my appointments for the afternoon and contact family services. We need to make this official." As she hung up, she turned to Jason, her heart aching. "Are you sure about this?" she asked gently. "I won't let anyone hurt you, Jason. I promise." He nodded, his eyes wide with hope, but also a hint of fear. "I don't want you to get hurt, too. Mom said Keller Corporation is really dangerous." Melissa knelt beside him, taking his small hands in hers. "I'm sure about you," she said firmly. "Everything else we'll figure out together." The drive back to her home was quiet, with only the hum of the car engine filling the space between them. Jason sat in the back seat, clutching his backpack as the rain tapped softly against the windshield. The suburban houses outside the window blurred by, but Jason barely noticed. He was too focused on the journey ahead, the uncertainty of what it meant to live with a grandmother he barely knew. Melissa watched her grandson carefully as he sat at the kitchen table, his spoon clinking against the bowl of cereal in front of him. It was the first morning they'd spent together, and the silence felt strange. She glanced at her laptop screen, trying to focus, but her mind kept wandering back to Jason's drawings. There was so much she didn't know about him, about his life before he arrived in her world. She had been too focused on the case, on the city's power struggles, to really understand what was happening to her family. She needed to make it right for him and for herself. "What are you looking at?" Jason's voice broke through her thoughts, his eyes studying her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "I'm trying to understand more about Keller Corporation," Melissa answered softly, choosing her words carefully. "About what they've been doing in the community." Jason set down his spoon, his gaze turning serious as he opened his sketchbook. He flipped through the pages until he found one that seemed to catch his attention. He turned the book around, showing Melissa his drawing. The image took her breath away. The sketch was detailed and precise. A wooded area at night with large trucks parked near a stream. Dark liquid poured from the trucks into the water, and in the corner of the drawing, the familiar logo of Keller Corporation was clearly visible. "Where is this?" Melissa asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she studied the sketch, her mind racing with the implications. "Behind our old apartment complex," Jason said quietly, his voice tinged with a sadness that tightened Melissa's chest. "Mom and I used to walk there, but then people started getting sick. The water smelled weird, and the trees started dying." He paused, his finger tracing the edge of the drawing. "Mom took pictures. She said she was going to show them to someone important." Melissa's heart thudded painfully in her chest. This was worse than she had imagined. If what Jason was showing her was true, this wasn't just about illegal evictions. This was environmental crime on a massive scale, possibly even criminal negligence leading to death. "When did this happen?" she asked, her mind already working to piece together the timeline. "A few months before." Jason's voice cracked as he swallowed hard. "Before she got sick, too." Melissa stared at the drawing in silence, the weight of Jason's words crashing over her. The realization that this could be connected to Keller Corporation left her feeling cold. But pursuing this meant exposing her connection to Jason as a judge presiding over Keller's case. Any personal involvement could compromise everything. She'd have to recuse herself, and Keller's lawyers would use their relationship to discredit any evidence they brought forward. "Can I keep this?" she asked, her voice hoarse as she gestured to the drawing. Jason nodded, carefully tearing the page from his sketchbook and handing it to her. Their fingers brushed for the first time since he had arrived, and Melissa felt a sharp pang in her chest. Jason didn't pull away. "There's more," he said, his voice stronger now. "I remember everything. Mom saw everything. She wanted to tell people about it." Melissa looked at him, her heart aching as she saw the determination in his eyes, the same courage she had seen in her daughter. She had no choice. She couldn't walk away from this. Rebecca Collins sat across from Melissa at Pete's coffee shop, her skeptical expression hard to miss. The veteran journalist had covered dozens of corporate scandals, but something about this case made her unusually hesitant. "Judge Whitman," Rebecca began, stirring her coffee with a frown, "you know Keller's reputation. 3 reporters who tried to expose them last year suddenly retracted their stories. One left journalism altogether." Melissa leaned forward, her voice low. "I know the risks, Rebecca, but this is different." She pulled out Jason's sketch, carefully preserved in a clear folder, and slid it across the table. Rebecca's eyes widened as she studied the drawing. "This is incredibly detailed. The positioning of the trucks, the terrain layout, even the drainage patterns." Her voice faltered for a moment as she looked up at Melissa. "Who drew this?" "My grandson," Melissa replied, still finding the words strange, even as she spoke them aloud. "He witnessed these activities with his mother, my daughter, before she died." Meanwhile, back at Melissa's house, Jason wandered through the quiet halls, still trying to understand the woman who had suddenly become his guardian. His fingers traced the wallpaper as he passed her study door, which was usually locked. Today it wasn't. Hesitant for just a moment, Jason slipped inside. The room smelled of leather and old paper. Tall bookshelves lined the walls, and on the massive desk, folders were spread out in neat piles. Jason's eyes caught familiar words. Keller Corporation versus Highland Community. His heart pounded as he began reading the documents. Detailed eviction notices, property assessments, and legal precedents, all supporting Keller's position. At the bottom of one page, he saw Melissa's signature, approving preliminary motions in Keller's favor. Back at the coffee shop, Rebecca was examining more of Jason's sketches. "These match complaints we received but could never verify," she said, her professional detachment cracking. "The timing, the locations, it all fits." "Then you'll help?" Melissa asked, her voice filled with both hope and uncertainty. Rebecca nodded slowly. "Yes, but we'll need more." Melissa's phone buzzed suddenly, pulling her from the moment. A text from her neighbor. "Your grandson just ran out of the house. He looks upset." Melissa's heart dropped. "I have to go," she said quickly, gathering her things. "Call me tomorrow about next steps." She rushed home in a panic, her mind racing. When she arrived, she found the study door open, papers disturbed on her desk. She followed the signs outside, finding Jason in the backyard, angrily throwing rocks at a tree. "You're just like them," he shouted when he saw her. "You helped Keller. You signed those papers." "Jason, wait," Melissa said, stepping toward him. "No!" He backed away, tears streaming down his face. Mom trusted the system. She thought someone would help if she just found the right person. "But you're part of it all." His voice cracked. "You let them hurt people, just like they hurt her." Those words struck Melissa like a physical blow. She stood frozen, watching as her grandson's pain and anger poured out. She saw her daughter's spirit in every gesture. All her carefully maintained professional distance, all her years of hiding behind legal procedures, crumbled in the face of this raw truth. "You're right," Melissa whispered, tears falling freely. "I failed your mother. I failed you both." The next morning, Melissa's car wound through an abandoned industrial area, the tension from yesterday's confrontation still lingering between her and Jason. But something had shifted. After Melissa's tearful confession, they were beginning to understand each other. "Is this the right way?" Melissa asked softly, glancing at Jason. He nodded, his finger pointing to a dirt road ahead. "Mom and I used to walk this way to the bus stop. That's how we saw the trucks." They turned down the path, bumping along the uneven road until they reached a clearing. Melissa parked, and they stepped out into the crisp morning air. The place matched Jason's sketch perfectly. A shallow valley surrounded by scrubby trees, with patches of bare earth scattered throughout. Jason walked ahead, his sneakers crunching on gravel. "Here," he said, stopping at a depression in the ground. This is where they would back up the trucks. Melissa knelt beside him, examining the ground. Fragments of rusty metal peeked through the soil, and an odd chemical smell filled the air. "What else do you remember about the trucks?" Melissa asked gently. "They always came at night," Jason said, opening his sketchbook to show her more detailed drawings. "Mom would write down the license plates." He trailed off, his lower lip trembling. Melissa's heart ached as she watched him struggle with the memory. "But what, sweetheart?" she asked softly. "Someone broke into our apartment 2 days later," Jason whispered. "All their notes were gone." She was so scared after that. Melissa reached out hesitantly, but then drew back, unsure if her touch would be welcome. Instead, she pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of the area. "We'll make this right, Jason. I promise." They spent the next hour documenting everything. The buried barrel fragments, the discolored soil, the distinctive tire tracks that matched Jason's drawings. As they worked, Jason began to open up, sharing memories of his mother that made both of them laugh and cry. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Melissa felt a sense of clarity. With Jason's courage and her determination, They would expose the truth. Melissa was in the kitchen making hot chocolate when she noticed Jason had left his old sketchbook on the counter. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked it up, her heart heavy with the weight of memories. She hesitated, then carefully opened the book. The first page took her breath away, an incredibly detailed portrait of her daughter, Sarah, laughing at something just out of view. Jason had captured not only her features but her spirit, the slight tilt of her head, the crinkles around her eyes when she smiled. It felt as though Sarah was right there in the room with her, laughing once again. Page after page revealed glimpses of their life together. Sarah reading bedtime stories, cooking dinner, walking Jason to school. But there were darker images too. Sarah, looking worried as bills lay scattered across their table, empty kitchen cabinets, and shadows under her eyes growing deeper with every passing day. Melissa's vision blurred with tears as she realized these drawings weren't just art. They were Jason's way of holding on to his mother, of processing the loss that had torn his world apart. Each sketch, filled with love and pain, made Melissa's heart ache. Those are from before. Jason's quiet voice came from behind her. He had entered the kitchen unnoticed, his presence almost as silent as his grief. Melissa wiped away the tears that had gathered in her eyes. "They're beautiful," she whispered. "Jason, you've captured her exactly as I remember her." She turned to the last drawing in the book, a peaceful portrait of Sarah sleeping on their worn couch. Despite all the struggles they'd faced, Sarah had looked serene in that moment, a quiet calm that made Melissa's heart ache even more. "She would be so proud of you," Melissa said softly, her voice thick with emotion. Jason moved closer, accepting the mug of hot chocolate she offered him. "She used to say I got my drawing talent from you," he said, a small, bittersweet smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "She showed me the Christmas cards you used to paint for her." Melissa looked away, a regretful pang in her chest. "I stopped sending those when she moved away," she admitted, her voice laden with guilt. "I thought I was teaching her a lesson about responsibility, but I was just being stubborn and proud." Before Jason could respond, there was a knock at the door, and Rebecca Collins entered, her professional demeanor still intact, but with a hint of excitement in her eyes. She spread out documents and photographs across the kitchen table, pointing to highlighted sections. "Look at these financial records," Rebecca said, her voice low despite their privacy. "Keller's been making regular payments to 3 different city officials. They're disguised as consulting fees, but the timing matches perfectly with the permit approvals they've received." Melissa leaned forward, her judicial instincts kicking in as she examined the documents. The transactions were carefully buried in legitimate-looking paperwork, but her trained eyes saw the pattern. "You're certain about the source?" she asked, her voice steady despite the growing tension. "Absolutely," Rebecca replied. She pulled out more papers, her face serious now. "My contact at the environmental agency confirmed it. They've been falsifying water quality reports for years. The real data shows chemical levels far above legal limits." The weight of this new information settled over them, and Melissa rubbed her temples, feeling the enormity of the situation. This was bigger than they had thought. "There's more," Rebecca continued, her voice tightening. "The sketches Jason showed us, they match perfectly with satellite images from the dates he mentioned. But here's the thing. Those images have been mysteriously removed from public archives. Someone's gone to great lengths to cover this up." Melissa's chest tightened at the mention of Jason's name. "What are you suggesting?" Rebecca hesitated before speaking. Jason's testimony, combined with his sketches, could be crucial evidence. He's an eyewitness, and his drawings showed details that only someone who was there could know. Melissa's response was immediate and firm. "No, he's been through enough." Rebecca's tone softened, but she didn't back down. "I understand your concern, Melissa, but think about what this evidence could mean. We're talking about hundreds of families affected by Keller's actions. Their discussion was interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Jason stood in the doorway, dressed in his pajamas, his face serious beyond his years. "I heard everything," he said, his voice quiet but determined. "Jason, you should be in bed," Melissa began, but he cut her off. "I want to help," he said firmly. Mom kept notes about everything she saw. She wanted to tell someone, but she was scared. His voice wavered slightly, but his chin remained high. "Mom would want us to fight." Melissa's heart ached as she looked at her grandson. In that moment, she saw so much of Sarah in him, the same determination, the same sense of justice. But she also saw the weight of the world on his small shoulders. "Jason," Melissa said gently, her voice trembling. "What Keller Corporation did was wrong, but testifying could be dangerous. These people, they've hurt people who've tried to expose them before," Jason finished for her, his voice unwavering. "I'm not afraid." Melissa's protective instincts flared. She wanted to shield him from this world, to keep him safe. But she also saw the fire in his eyes, the courage that had come from Sarah. Rebecca spoke up then. "We could take precautions, keep his involvement minimal until absolutely necessary. The sketches alone are compelling evidence." Melissa looked between them, Rebecca, with her carefully gathered evidence, and Jason, with his mother's courage shining in his eyes. The weight of the decision pressed down on her. As a judge, she knew the legal risks. As a grandmother, she feared for Jason's safety. But as she looked at her grandson, her heart swelled with pride, and she knew what she had to do. "Let me think about it," she said finally, her voice heavy with concern. "We need to be very careful about how we proceed." The next morning, the newspaper landed on Melissa's doorstep with a dull thud. The headline made her stomach drop. "Judge's personal vendetta questions arise in Keller Corporation case." Below it was a photo of her and Jason leaving the courthouse, his small hand clutched tightly in hers. Her hand shook as she brought the paper inside. The article painted her as a vengeful judge, using her position to wage a personal war against Keller Corporation. It twisted every decision she had made, every motion she had signed, to fit their narrative. "Is everything okay?" Jason asked from the kitchen table, where he sat eating cereal, his eyes tired from the restless nights he had been having lately. "Everything's fine," Melissa lied, tucking the paper under her arm. But Jason, ever perceptive, wasn't fooled. "I saw the men following us yesterday," he said quietly, his eyes darkening. The black car. Melissa's protective instincts flared. She'd noticed them too, the dark sedan that had tailed them from the grocery store to the library. "We'll be more careful," she reassured him, though her voice trembled slightly. Her phone buzzed with a message from Rebecca. "Turn on the news now." Melissa flicked on the kitchen TV, her heart pounding. Andrew Keller stood at a podium outside the courthouse, his expression grave, but his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "It pains me to bring this motion," he was saying, "but Judge Whitman's clear conflict of interest makes it impossible for her to render an impartial judgment in this case." Jason's spoon clattered against his bowl. "He's trying to stop you from being the judge," he said, his voice full of quiet fury. Before Melissa could respond, her phone rang. It was the chief judge. "Melissa, we need to talk about this motion," the voice on the other end said. "The media attention is becoming a circus." "I understand," Melissa said stiffly. "I'll be there in an hour." After hanging up, she called Rebecca. "Can you watch Jason today?" "I don't want him alone." "Of course," Rebecca replied, her tone serious. "But Melissa, there's more. Someone broke into my office last night. My files were ransacked." Melissa's blood ran cold as she looked at Jason, who was pretending not to listen while pushing his cereal around in his bowl. "We'll talk later," she said quietly. When Rebecca arrived, Melissa pulled her aside. "Double-check the locks," she instructed. "Don't answer the door for anyone. If you see anything suspicious, call me immediately." The drive to the courthouse was tense. Reporters swarmed her car as she pulled into a reserved spot, their cameras flashing in her face. "Judge Whitman, is it true you're using your grandson to attack Keller Corporation?" one reporter shouted. "How long have you been planning this vendetta?" Inside her chambers, the chief judge waited, his expression stern. "This is a mess, Melissa," he said, motioning to the papers in front of him. "The motion cites your relationship with the boy, your daughter's former employment with Keller Corporation, and your recent investigation into their practices, all of which proves Keller's guilt, not your bias." Melissa was in her kitchen, preparing hot chocolate for the evening, when she noticed Jason's old sketchbook left carelessly on the counter. She hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to look through it, but the curiosity overwhelmed her. Gently, she opened the book, and the first page took her breath away. It was a portrait of her daughter, Sarah, laughing at something just outside the frame. The detail was extraordinary, especially coming from such young hands. Jason had captured not just Sarah's features, but her very essence. The slight tilt of her head, the crinkles around her eyes that appeared whenever she smiled. As Melissa turned each page, she found more of their life together. Sarah reading bedtime stories, cooking dinner, and walking Jason to school. But there were darker images too. She saw Sarah looking worried, her face shadowed by bills spread across the table, empty kitchen cabinets, the exhaustion in her eyes growing deeper. Tears blurred Melissa's vision as she realized that these drawings weren't just art. They were Jason's way of holding on to his mother, a way of processing the pain of losing her. Each sketch was filled with such love and heartache that it made Melissa's chest tighten with sorrow. "Those are from before." Jason's quiet voice came from behind her, making her jump. He had entered the room unnoticed, silently watching her study his memories. Melissa wiped her eyes, her voice breaking as she spoke. "They're beautiful, Jason," she said, turning to face him. "You've captured her exactly as I remember her." Jason moved closer, taking the mug of hot chocolate she offered. "She used to say I got my drawing talent from you," he murmured, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. "She showed me the Christmas cards you used to paint for her. I stopped sending those when she moved away." A heavy regret filled Melissa's heart. "I thought I was teaching her a lesson about responsibility, but I was just being stubborn and proud." Meanwhile, across town, Rebecca Collins was at Melissa's kitchen table, carefully spreading out documents and photographs. Her usual professional composure was tinged with excitement as she pointed to a section in the papers. "Look at these financial records," Rebecca said in a low voice, keeping her tone steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Keller's been making regular payments to 3 different city officials. The amounts are disguised as consulting fees, but the timing matches up perfectly with their permit approvals." Melissa leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she studied the documents. Her judicial experience helped her spot the meticulous way the transactions had been hidden within seemingly legitimate paperwork. "Are you certain about the source?" Melissa asked, her voice sharp. "Absolutely." Rebecca pulled out more papers. "My contact in the environmental agency confirmed it. They've been falsifying water quality reports for years. The real data shows chemical levels far above legal limits." The weight of the information settled over them, and the kitchen suddenly felt much smaller. Melissa rubbed her temples, thinking about all the families affected by Keller's actions. "This is bigger than we thought," she murmured, her voice heavy with the realization. Rebecca continued, her expression growing serious. "There's more. The sketches Jason showed us, they match perfectly with satellite images from the dates he mentioned. But here's the thing. Those images have been mysteriously removed from public archives. Someone has gone to great lengths to cover this up." Melissa's chest tightened at the mention of Jason's name. "What are you suggesting?" Rebecca looked her in the eye. Jason's testimony, combined with his sketches, could be crucial evidence. He's an eyewitness, and his drawings showed details only someone who was there could know. Melissa shook her head firmly. "No, Jason's been through enough." Rebecca's tone softened. "I understand your concern, but think about what this could mean. We're talking about hundreds of families affected by Keller's actions." Their discussion was interrupted by a creak from the hallway. Jason stood there in his pajamas, his face serious beyond his years. "I heard everything," he said softly, stepping into the kitchen. Melissa's heart sank. "Jason, you should be in bed." But he cut her off, his voice unwavering. "I want to help," he said firmly. Mom kept notes about everything she saw. She wanted to tell someone, but she was scared. His voice wavered slightly, but his chin remained high. "Mom would want us to fight." Tears pricked at Melissa's eyes. She saw so much of Sarah in him at that moment. Her daughter's same fierce determination, her unyielding sense of justice. "Jason, what Keller Corporation did was wrong, but testifying could be dangerous. These people, they've hurt others who've tried to expose them before." "I'm not afraid," Jason insisted, his voice steady even as his hands trembled slightly. "Mom always said doing the right thing isn't easy, but that's why it's important." Rebecca watched the exchange quietly before speaking up. "We could take precautions. Keep his involvement minimal until absolutely necessary. The sketches alone are compelling evidence." Melissa glanced between Rebecca, holding the carefully gathered evidence, and Jason, whose courage was unwavering. The weight of the decision pressed down on her. As a judge, she knew the legal risks. As a grandmother, she feared for Jason's safety. But looking at her grandson's determined face, she saw a chance to honor her daughter's memory and, perhaps, make amends for her past failures. "Let me think about it," she said, her voice heavy with concern. "We need to be very careful about how we proceed." The following morning, the newspaper landed on Melissa's doorstep with a dull thud. The headline made her stomach drop. "Judge's personal vendetta questioned in Keller Corporation case." Beneath it was a photo of her and Jason leaving the courthouse, his small hand clutched in hers. Her hand shook as she brought the paper inside. The article painted her as a vengeful judge, using her position to wage a personal war against Keller Corporation. They dug up every controversy from her career, twisting each decision to fit their narrative. "Is everything okay?" Jason asked from the kitchen table, where he sat eating cereal, his eyes tired from a restless night. "Everything's fine," Melissa lied, tucking the paper under her arm. But Jason was too perceptive for that. "I saw the men following us yesterday," he said quietly, his voice low but clear. Melissa froze. She had noticed them too, the dark sedan that had tailed them from the grocery store to the library. "We'll be more careful," she assured him, her voice trembling slightly. Her phone buzzed with a message from Rebecca. "Turn on the news now." Melissa flicked on the kitchen TV, and there stood Andrew Keller, speaking at a podium outside the courthouse, his expression grave, but his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "It pains me to bring this motion," he was saying, "but Judge Whitman's clear conflict of interest makes it impossible for her to render an impartial judgment in this case." Jason's spoon clattered against his bowl. "He's trying to stop you from being the judge," he said, his voice filled with outrage. Before Melissa could respond, her phone rang. It was the chief judge. "Melissa, we need to talk about this motion," the chief judge said, his voice tense. "The media attention. It's becoming a circus." "I understand," Melissa said stiffly. "I'll be there in an hour." After hanging up, she quickly called Rebecca. "Can you watch Jason today? I don't want him alone." "Of course," Rebecca replied. "But Melissa, there's more. Someone broke into my office last night. My files were ransacked." Melissa's blood ran cold. She looked at Jason, who was pretending not to listen, pushing his cereal around the bowl. "We'll talk later," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. Melissa leaned forward, studying the drawing intently. "This could be the key," she murmured, "but we'll need to move carefully. Keller's already shown they'll go to extreme lengths to silence opposition." The morning newspaper landed with a heavy thud on Melissa's kitchen table. The headline screamed, "Judge Whitman. Justice or personal vendetta?" Below it was a photo of her and Jason leaving the courthouse, her hand protectively resting on his shoulder. Melissa's hands trembled as she read the article. It painted her as an emotionally unstable judge, using her grandson's tragic story to settle old scores. The reporter quoted anonymous sources. suggesting she was unfit to serve and compromised by personal grief. "They're scared," Daniel said, sitting across from her with a cup of coffee. Keller's pulling every string he can find. In the living room, Jason sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by his sketches. They had been preparing him for hours, going over what he would say in court. His small shoulders seemed to carry an unbearably heavy burden. "Let's take a break," Melissa suggested, watching his exhausted face. "You've been working so hard." Jason shook his head stubbornly. "I need to get it right, for Mom." Daniel gathered his legal papers and stood up. "I'll make some calls. See what other pressure Keller's applying to the local officials. We need to stay ahead of him." After Daniel left, Melissa sat down beside Jason on the floor. He was working on a new drawing. His mother's face, every detail rendered with loving care. Her kind eyes, her gentle smile, even the small scar above her eyebrow. "She used to sing to me," Jason said suddenly, his voice barely a whisper. "Every night before bed, even when she was really sick, she'd try." His pencil moved slowly across the paper, adding shadows to his mother's hair. "Sometimes I forget what her voice sounds like. That's why I draw her, so I won't forget what she looked like, too." Melissa's heart cracked as she watched him. She reached out hesitantly, but then pulled her hand back, unsure if her touch would be welcome. "The last time I saw her," Jason continued, "she was trying to be brave. She knew something bad was happening at work, but she wouldn't tell me what. She just hugged me really tight and said everything would be okay." His pencil stopped moving, and a tear splashed onto the paper. But it wasn't okay. She never came home. Unable to hold back any longer, Melissa wrapped her arms around him. This time, Jason didn't pull away. He turned into her embrace, his small body shaking with sobs. "I miss her so much," he cried. "Sometimes it hurts so bad I can't breathe." "I know, sweetheart," Melissa whispered, her own tears falling. "I miss her too, and I'm so sorry I wasn't there for either of you before. But I'm here now, and I promise you, I won't let anyone hurt you." Jason looked up at her, his eyes red but determined. "Keller hurt my mom. He can't get away with it. He won't." Melissa wiped his tears with her thumb, her voice firm. "We're going to make sure of that. Your drawings, your memories, they're going to help us show everyone the truth. Your mother would be so proud of you." Jason picked up his sketch again, adding the final touches to his mother's smile. "When I draw her," he said softly, "it feels like she's still here, like she's watching over me." "She is," Melissa said, holding him close. "And now you have me watching over you too. No matter what people say about me, I won't stop fighting for you, for justice, for your mother." Rebecca's expose hit like a thunderbolt. Keller Corporation's deadly secret. How corporate greed claimed a mother's life. It dominated every news channel and social media feed. The article detailed years of illegal chemical dumping and linked it directly to the death of Jason's mother, complete with his haunting sketches of the contaminated sites. Public outrage exploded. Protesters gathered outside Keller Corporation's headquarters, carrying signs with Jason's artwork printed on them. Phone lines at the courthouse lit up with angry citizens demanding justice. But Andrew Keller wasn't finished. Within hours, his legal team released documents that seemed to contradict Rebecca's findings. Fabricated safety reports, doctored photographs, and testimony from witnesses claiming Rebecca's story was false. "It's all lies." Rebecca burst into Melissa's office, throwing down a stack of Keller's documents. "They've created an entire fake paper trail. They're saying I manufactured evidence." Melissa studied the documents, her face grim. "They're forcing my hand. I'll have to step down from the eviction case to defend you in court. We can't let them discredit your reporting." Back at home, Jason sat at his desk, staring at his sketches. The television droned in the background, with reporters debating the validity of Rebecca's story. He heard his mother's name mentioned again and again, sometimes with sympathy, sometimes with doubt. "Maybe I shouldn't testify," he said quietly when Melissa came to check on him. "Everything's getting worse. People are saying Mom was lying about the chemicals. What if I mess up? What if I say something wrong?" Melissa knelt beside his chair. "Jason, look at me. Your drawings show the truth. They tell your mother's story better than any words could. But Keller's making everyone doubt Rebecca." Jason's voice trembled. "And now you can't even be the judge anymore." He pushed away his sketchbook. "It's my fault. If I hadn't shown you those drawings—" "Stop right there." Melissa's voice was firm but gentle. "None of this is your fault. Keller is attacking us because he's afraid. Your drawings, your courage in coming forward, that's what's threatening him. That's why he's fighting so hard." Jason picked up his pencil again, twirling it nervously. "I don't feel very brave." "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," Melissa said. "It means doing what's right, even when you are scared, just like your mother did." The pencil in Jason's hand stilled. He looked at his latest drawing. The chemical drums hidden behind Keller's facility, exactly as he'd seen them. His mother had known about them. She'd tried to stop it, and now it was his turn to finish what she'd started. Late into the night, Melissa sat in her home office, surrounded by stacks of court records. Her eyes burned from hours of reading, but she couldn't stop. Something about a particular case file from 3 years ago had caught her attention. As she pulled out a sealed envelope marked confidential, her hands trembled. Inside was a letter, and the familiar handwriting made her heart stop. It was from her daughter. "Dear Mom," the letter began. "I know we haven't spoken in years, but I'm scared. Keller Corporation is doing terrible things, and I have proof. People who speak up keep disappearing or having accidents. I don't know who to trust anymore. I tried calling your office, but they said you were too busy. Please, if you read this, I need your help." Melissa's vision blurred with tears. The letter was dated just 2 months before her daughter's death. She had never seen it. Her staff must have filed it away without telling her, following her strict instructions about personal matters. "Oh God," she whispered, pressing her hand to her mouth. "You tried to reach me. You needed me, and I wasn't there." The weight of her failure crushed her. All those years wasted on pride, on maintaining her professional image, on being the ice queen. Her daughter had been in danger, had reached out for help, and Melissa's own rigid rules had created the wall that kept them apart. She heard Jason's quiet footsteps in the hallway and looked up to see him standing in the doorway, clutching his sketchbook. In his face, she saw echoes of his mother. The same determined set of his jaw, the same gentle eyes. "I found a letter," Melissa said, her voice rough with emotion. "From your mother. She tried to tell me about Keller. She tried to warn me, and She couldn't finish." Jason approached slowly, placing his small hand on her shoulder. The simple gesture of comfort, so like his mother would have done, broke something inside her. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed, pulling him close. "I was so wrong, so stubborn. But I promise you this. I will not fail you like I failed her. We're going to expose everything Keller has done, every illegal dump site, every cover-up, every lie. Whatever it takes." She pulled back, wiping her eyes, and looked at her grandson. "Your mother was incredibly brave, Jason. She tried to stop them, even though she was afraid. And now we're going to finish what she started." The letter trembled in her hands, a testament to her greatest failure, but also a roadmap to her redemption. For the first time, Melissa understood that being a judge wasn't about maintaining a perfect image or keeping everyone at arm's length. It was about protecting those who needed justice most, even if that meant breaking down the walls she'd built around her own heart. The morning began with a devastating phone call. Melissa's bank accounts had been frozen, and the State Bar Association was launching an emergency investigation into her conduct. She knew immediately who was behind it. "He's using every connection he has," Daniel Perez said grimly, pacing in her living room. "Keller is trying to crush you before you can expose him." Rebecca Collins sat nearby, furiously taking notes. "We need to move faster. If we can just get the evidence. A crash from upstairs cut her off. Melissa's heart stopped. "Jason," she called out, already running toward the stairs. The sound of breaking glass and a muffled cry sent her sprinting to his room. The window was shattered, the curtains fluttering in the wind. Jason's sketchbook lay torn on the floor, and his bedroom was empty. On his bed sat a single piece of paper with typed words. "Drop the case or you'll never see him again." Melissa's legs gave out, and she crumpled to the floor, clutching the note with trembling hands. "No, no," she whispered. "Not him. Please, not him." Rebecca and Daniel rushed in, taking in the scene with horror. Daniel immediately called the police while Rebecca held Melissa as she began to shake uncontrollably. "This is my fault," Melissa choked out, her voice thick with despair. "I failed his mother, and now I've failed him too. I should have protected him better." "Listen to me," Rebecca said firmly, gripping Melissa's shoulders and forcing her to meet her gaze. "This isn't over. Keller's desperate. He wouldn't have done something this extreme otherwise. We can still stop him." Just then, Daniel hung up the phone and knelt beside them. "I have an idea. Remember that security guard I interviewed last week? The one who quit Keller Corporation? He mentioned a warehouse where they keep sensitive documents. If they're holding Jason somewhere, it'll be there." Rebecca finished his thought. "Somewhere they control completely." Melissa wiped her eyes, forcing herself to focus. "But how do we figure out which warehouse Keller owns out of dozens of properties?" Rebecca pulled out her phone, scrolling through files. Jason drew several Keller properties when he followed his mother to work. One of them stood out, extra security cameras everywhere. It seemed excessive for a simple storage facility. "The Miller Street warehouse," Daniel said, his voice sharp. "I know it. It's isolated, heavily guarded. Perfect place to hide someone." Melissa stood up, her grief hardening into steely determination. "Then that's where we start." She looked at Daniel. "Can your security guard friend help us get in?" Daniel nodded. He still has his access codes. "They haven't changed the system yet. I can create a diversion," Rebecca offered, her tone resolute. "I'll call a press conference and announce we're about to expose everything at a different location. Draw their attention away." Melissa's mind raced, her judgment calculating the risks and possibilities. She glanced at the broken window, at Jason's scattered drawings on the floor. Her grandson was out there, scared and alone, just like his mother had been. But this time, it would be different. This time, she wouldn't fail him. The Miller Street warehouse loomed ahead, its windows like dead eyes staring down at them. Melissa clutched Jason's sketchbook to her chest, comparing his detailed drawings to the building before them. Every security camera, every door matched perfectly. Rebecca's press conference was starting in 5 minutes. Daniel checked his phone. The guard confirmed most of Keller's security team will be watching the live feed. Melissa's hands trembled as they approached the side entrance. She followed Daniel as he typed in the code. The door beeped green, and they slipped inside. The air in the warehouse was thick with dust, and rows of filing cabinets stretched into the shadows. A muffled sound from above made Melissa's heart skip a beat. "Second floor," she breathed. It was exactly like Jason had drawn of his mother's workplace. They crept up the metal stairs, each step echoing despite their care. In the darkness, they heard quiet sniffling, a sound Melissa knew all too well. It was the same way Jason cried at night when he thought she couldn't hear him. 2 guards stood outside a door, but their attention was fixed on a tablet streaming Rebecca's press conference. Daniel gestured toward a fire alarm on the wall. He nodded, signaling Melissa. Without hesitation, Melissa pulled the alarm. The shrieking siren sent the guards running toward the prescribed evacuation route. Daniel quickly picked the lock, and Melissa burst through the door. Jason was sitting huddled in a corner, his hands loosely tied in front of him. When he saw Melissa, his eyes went wide with disbelief and hope. "Grandma," he whispered. Melissa ran to him, her tears falling freely as she untied his hands. "I'm here, sweetheart, I'm here." Jason threw himself into her arms, sobbing. "I knew you'd come. I drew you a map in my head, like Mom taught me. I remembered everything." "You're so brave," Melissa choked out, holding him tight. "I'm never letting you go again. Never." Daniel urged them toward the exit. "We need to move now." They hurried down the stairs, Melissa keeping Jason close against her side. The alarm blared, covering their escape. They reached Daniel's car, just as voices shouted in the distance. As they drove away, Jason clung to Melissa in the back seat, his face buried in her shoulder. She stroked his hair, feeling his trembling slowly subside. "They wanted me to tell you to stop," Jason mumbled, his voice shaking. "But I knew you wouldn't. You're like Mom. You don't give up when something's wrong." Melissa's throat tightened, her voice steady despite the weight of everything they'd been through. "No more running," she said firmly. "No more hiding. We're going to make Keller answer for everything he's done." Together, the packed courtroom fell silent as Melissa Whitman walked to the front. Instead of taking her usual place at the bench, she stood before it, facing Judge Thompson, who had been assigned to replace her. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady and clear, "I formally recuse myself as presiding judge in this case. I request to be sworn in as a witness against Keller Corporation." Gasps and whispers filled the room. Andrew Keller's smug expression faltered for the first time since the trial began. In the gallery, Jason sat between Rebecca and Daniel, his sketchbook open on his lap. "Order in the court," Judge Thompson commanded, banging his gavel. He turned to Melissa. "Miss Whitman, you understand the gravity of this decision?" "I do, Your Honor," Melissa replied, her eyes finding Jason's. "Some things are more important than career advancement." As Melissa was sworn in, Jason's pencil moved rapidly across his paper, his face scrunched in concentration as he captured a memory from his captivity. A glimpse of papers being hastily stuffed into a trash bin by one of his captors. Daniel leaned over to look at the sketch. His eyes widened as he recognized the location, a dumpster behind the Miller Street warehouse. He quickly passed a note to Rebecca, who nodded and slipped out of the courtroom. The prosecutor began, "Miss Whitman, please tell the court about your connection to this case." Melissa took a deep breath. "My daughter worked for Keller Corporation. She died trying to expose their illegal practices. My son, my grandson, was recently kidnapped in an attempt to silence us both." The courtroom erupted again. Andrew Keller's face turned red as he whispered furiously to his lawyers. Judge Thompson restored order with several sharp raps of his gavel. "That's a serious accusation," the prosecutor said. "Do you have evidence to support these claims?" "Yes," Melissa replied firmly. "And thanks to my grandson's photographic memory and artistic ability, we're about to have more." She glanced at Jason, who held up his completed sketch. Daniel was already on his phone, coordinating with Rebecca to retrieve the documents from the location Jason had drawn, perfectly detailed. The tension in the courtroom was electric. Andrew Keller's confident facade had completely crumbled, replaced by barely contained panic. He knew, as everyone present seemed to know, that the tide had turned. Melissa stood tall on the witness stand, her voice unwavering as she began to tell her story. She was no longer the ice queen of the courtroom. She was a grandmother fighting for justice, and her determination filled the room with an almost tangible force. The community center buzzed with angry voices as displaced families packed the rows of folding chairs. Melissa stood at the podium, her usual courtroom confidence wavering under their hostile stares. "She's one of them," someone shouted from the back. "Just another rich judge who doesn't care about us. My sister lost everything because of judges like her," another voice called out. Melissa gripped the edges of the podium, her knuckles turning white. "You're right," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "I was part of the problem for years. I interpreted the law without considering the human cost." The room grew quieter, surprised by her admission. I chose career over family. I lost my daughter because of it. Her voice cracked. And now, through my grandson Jason, I've seen firsthand what Keller Corporation does to families like yours. Jason, who had been sitting quietly in the front row, stood up. His small frame seemed to gather strength as he faced the crowd. My mom tried to tell people what Keller was doing, he said, his voice trembling but clear. She died because of it. My grandmother, he looked at Melissa. She's different now. She's trying to make things right. An elderly woman in the third row stood up. My grandson is Jason's age, she said. We lost our home last month. If what you're saying is true, we want to help. Others began nodding. A man who had lost his family restaurant to Keller's development plans raised his hand. What do you need from us? Your stories, Melissa replied. Your testimonies. Together, we can show the pattern of destruction Keller has left behind. And what about you? A woman cradling a baby asked. What do you get out of this? A chance to be the person my daughter needed me to be, Melissa answered, tears in her eyes. A chance to protect other families from experiencing what Jason has endured. One by one, people began standing up, sharing their stories of loss and devastation at Keller's hands. The atmosphere in the room shifted from hostility to determination. Jason walked to his grandmother's side and took her hand. The simple gesture seemed to touch something deep inside the crowd, igniting a fire of hope and change. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the legal battle for justice reached its peak. Rebecca Collins approached the bench, carrying a thick manila folder, with Daniel Perez standing by her side, his face resolute with determination. Your Honor, Rebecca began, her voice steady. These documents were recovered following the illegal detention of Jason Whitman by Keller Corporation's employees. Andrew Keller shot up from his chair, his voice sharp with objection. There's no proof these documents came from my company. This is pure speculation. The judge raised his hand to calm the room. I'll allow the presentation of evidence. Continue, Miss Collins. Rebecca spread the documents across the evidence table, each paper a damning piece of the puzzle. These papers detailed the systematic bribery of local officials, falsified environmental impact reports, and records of illegal chemical dumping dating back 5 years, she stated. Melissa Whitman, seated in the witness box, leaned forward, her eyes meeting Jason's in the gallery. He sat clutching his sketchbook, his expression both solemn and determined. Furthermore, Daniel Perez added, these documents contain signatures from Mr. Keller himself, authorizing the cover-up of multiple toxic spills. Andrew Keller's face reddened with anger. These documents could have been fabricated. They were supposedly found during an alleged kidnapping that has yet to be proven. Melissa stood up, her voice unwavering as she addressed the court. Your Honor, if I may address the validity of these documents, she said, her words carrying the weight of years of legal experience. These papers bear the same watermarks and security features as the official Keller Corporation documents I reviewed during my time presiding over previous cases. The signatures match those I've seen on countless legal filings. But more importantly, these documents confirm what dozens of families have been trying to tell us for years. She gestured to the packed gallery, her voice growing stronger. These aren't just papers. They're proof of the systematic destruction of communities, of lives lost, including my daughter's, due to corporate greed and negligence. Andrew Keller's lawyer jumped up with an objection. This is an emotional appeal, not a legal argument. The judge overruled it firmly. Continue, Miss Whitman. Melissa remained composed as she continued. The evidence trail in these documents matches perfectly with the locations and dates in Jason's sketches of the dumping sites. Sites where independent testing has already confirmed toxic contamination. Rebecca stepped forward with another file. We've had these documents authenticated by 3 independent forensic experts, Your Honor. Their reports are included here. The judge examined the authentication reports carefully while the courtroom held its breath. Andrew Keller whispered furiously to his legal team, but the judge remained focused. The evidence is admitted. The documents will be entered into the official record. A murmur of relief rippled through the gallery. Jason's face broke into a small smile as he looked at his grandmother, who remained composed but couldn't hide the triumph in her eyes. Andrew Keller slumped in his chair, his arrogant demeanor cracking as he watched his carefully constructed web of lies begin to unravel. Outside the courthouse, the media circus had escalated into a frenzy. Reporters thrust microphones at Melissa as she walked up the courthouse steps, Jason's small hand tightly clutching hers. "Judge Whitman, how do you respond to allegations that you accepted bribes in the 2018 Henderson case?" One reporter shouted. Another called out, "Is it true you had a drinking problem during your early years on the bench?" Melissa kept her head high, guiding Jason through the chaos, but inside, her stomach churned. Andrew Keller's smear campaign had already taken root. Every news channel seemed to be running stories about her past cases, questioning her judgments and digging up old controversies that she had long put behind her. That evening, Melissa sat in her living room, a stack of newspapers spread across the coffee table. The headlines felt like personal attacks. Judge Whitman's history of controversial rulings. Former clerk questions Whitman's competency. Asterisk, the Ice Queen's fall from grace. Asterisk, but the stories about Jason were even worse. Conservative pundits questioned how a 10-year-old could provide reliable testimony, with some suggesting he was being manipulated by anti-business activists. One particularly nasty headline read, asterisk, 10-year-old witness, credible or coached. Asterisk, the article went on to question whether Jason's sketches could be trusted, suggesting they might have been drawn with adult guidance to frame Keller Corporation. Melissa's hand shook as she set the paper down. "I'm so sorry, Jason," she whispered. "I never meant for them to come after you like this." Jason looked up from his sketchbook, where he had been working on a new drawing. His face showed a maturity beyond his years. "It's okay, Grandma. They're just scared because we're telling the truth." Tears welled up in Melissa's eyes, but Jason's calm words brought a sense of peace to her. "Maybe we should—" Jason interrupted her, his voice steady and clear. "Mom always said you'd fight for what's right." Melissa stared at her grandson, struck by the echo of her daughter in his words. "She said that about me?" Jason nodded, sliding closer to show her his current sketch. It depicted two figures standing together, facing a stormy sky. "Even when she was mad at you, she still believed in you. She said you were the strongest person she knew." Melissa wrapped an arm around Jason's shoulders, studying the drawing. The figures in the sketch stood tall and unafraid despite the darkness around them. "Is this us?" she asked softly. "Yeah," Jason said. "We're not going to let them scare us away, right?" The simple question, filled with such trust and hope, made Melissa's throat tighten with emotion. She thought of all the times she had chosen her career over her family, of all the moments she had missed with her daughter. But here was Jason, offering her a chance at redemption, believing in her despite everything. "No," she said firmly, pulling him closer. "We're not going to let them scare us away. Not this time." Jason leaned into her embrace, adding final touches to his sketch. "Mom will be proud of us," he whispered. Melissa kissed the top of his head, feeling a surge of determination replace her earlier doubt. Let Andrew Keller and his media allies dig up whatever they wanted from her past. Let them question her motives and her character. She had something now that she had never had before, a chance to make things right, to be the person her daughter had believed she could be. Daniel Perez stood before Andrew Keller, his gentle demeanor masking the sharp intelligence that had made him a formidable environmental lawyer. The courtroom was packed with reporters scribbling furiously in their notebooks and spectators leaning forward in their seats. "Mr. Keller," Daniel began, his voice steady and clear, "could you explain these shipping manifests from June 15th of last year?" He held up a document recovered during Jason's rescue. Keller's usual smugness flickered slightly. "Those are standard waste disposal records," he said dismissively. "Standard?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Then perhaps you can explain why the chemical quantities listed here don't match the official EPA filings. Simple clerical errors, Keller replied, but his fingers drummed nervously against the witness stand. Clerical errors that occurred systematically over 3 years, Daniel stated, his voice calm but firm. He approached the witness stand with another stack of papers. And what about these emails, Mr. Keller? The ones where you specifically instructed your site managers to, and I quote, adjust the numbers to meet compliance requirements. Color rose in Keller's face. Those documents are taken out of context. Daniel's voice remained calm. Then let's add context. These disposal sites were primarily located in low-income neighborhoods, correct? We operate where land is available, Keller snapped. And did you personally select these locations? Daniel pressed. Of course I did. Keller's voice rose. I oversee all major operational decisions. Every disposal site, every contract, every adjustment to make the numbers work. I sign off on all of it. His eyes widened as he realized what he had just admitted. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Melissa, sitting in the gallery, gripped the bench in front of her. Daniel let the admission hang in the air for a moment before continuing. So you're confirming that you personally authorized the falsification of environmental compliance. Jason Whitman sat nervously in the witness chair, his small feet barely touching the ground. His eyes found Melissa in the crowd, and she gave him a silent, encouraging nod. It was his moment to speak the truth, to expose the darkness that had claimed his mother's life, and he was determined to do so. Daniel Perez's voice was gentle but firm as he began. Can you tell us about the night you were taken? Jason swallowed hard, taking a deep breath to steady himself. I was in my room at Grandma's house, working on my sketches. Then I heard a noise downstairs. His voice trembled slightly, but grew stronger as he continued. 2 men grabbed me. They put me in a black van and took me to a warehouse. Daniel held up one of Jason's sketches. Is this the warehouse you were taken to? Jason nodded, pointing to specific details in the drawing. There were these big metal drums everywhere, just like the ones I used to see behind Mom's work. And while they were moving me, I saw them throwing away papers. They didn't know I was watching. The courtroom was transfixed, the air thick with the weight of his words. The sketch Jason presented was detailed beyond belief. The layout of the warehouse, the placement of the chemical drums, even the distinctive logo on the discarded papers. Your mother worked for Keller Corporation, didn't she? Daniel asked. Jason's voice grew quieter, but there was a heaviness to his words. Yes, she tried to tell people about the chemicals they were dumping. She got really sick after that. He couldn't finish the sentence, but the meaning was clear. His mother had paid the ultimate price for her attempt to expose the truth. The courtroom was eerily silent now. Every eye was fixed on the brave young boy, whose testimony was about to change everything. Even the most hardened reporters in the room seemed moved by the gravity of his words. Across the courtroom, Andrew Keller sat at the defense table, his previous confidence slipping into barely concealed panic as he watched his world unravel. In the courthouse hallway, Keller's lawyers approached Melissa with a thick manila envelope. Their faces were carefully neutral as they slid the documents across the table. Mr. Keller is offering a substantial settlement, one of them said smoothly. Enough money to secure Jason's future and help all the displaced families rebuild their lives. The offer expires at midnight. Melissa's heart pounded as she spread the documents across her desk. The numbers were staggering. Each family would receive enough money to buy new homes, and there would be a substantial trust fund set up for Jason. It seemed like the solution they'd been hoping for, but Melissa knew it was more than just a monetary offer. It was a deal with the devil. Daniel Perez knocked softly on her door. They made you an offer, didn't they? Melissa nodded. It's substantial. The families could start over. Jason would be taken care of. And Keller walks away clean. Daniel's voice was quiet but pointed. He's hoping you'll give up, that the money will be enough to silence the truth. Melissa pressed her hands to her temples, exhausted by the weight of the decision she had to make. These people have lost everything, Daniel. Who am I to deny them a chance at stability? Later, she found Jason in the courthouse library, sketching as he often did when he needed to think. He looked up as she approached, his eyes wise beyond his years. "They want us to give up, don't they?" he asked. Melissa sat beside him, her heart aching for the young boy who had seen more injustice than anyone should ever have to endure. "They're offering enough money to help everyone. All the families could have new homes." Jason paused for a moment, his pencil moving methodically across the page. Then, he turned his sketchbook toward her. It was a drawing of his mother, her face determined and proud. "Mom always said you can't put a price on doing what's right," Jason said softly. "She told me about you, you know. She said you never let anyone push you around, that you always fought for what was right. She said never let them win, because once they do, they'll never stop." Tears welled in Melissa's eyes. Her daughter had remembered her that way, even after everything. She pulled Jason close, holding him tight, the weight of her decision clear. The next day, in the courthouse conference room, Melissa stood before the families, explaining the settlement offer. Murmurs rippled through the room as she named the staggering figure. "It's your decision," she told them. "But remember, if we take this money, Keller Corporation will keep operating. They'll find other communities to destroy, other lives to ruin, one by one." The families stood with her, their decision unanimous. "My children deserve more than blood money," one mother declared. "They deserve to see that the truth matters." Melissa watched them with pride, her heart swelling with determination. The fight for justice was far from over. When Keller's lawyers returned for her answer, Melissa handed the envelope back unopened. "Tell Mr. Keller we'll see him in court," she said firmly. The lawyer's polite smiles vanished. "You're making a serious mistake." "No," Melissa replied, thinking of her daughter's courage and Jason's unwavering faith. "For the first time in a long while, I'm doing exactly what's right." The courtroom tensed as Andrew Keller's latest witness took the stand. The man, claiming to be a former employee of Keller Corporation, testified that he had never seen any illegal dumping. He painted Jason's mother as unstable and unreliable, suggesting her accusations were merely delusions. Jason's hands trembled as he gripped a sketchbook, but his voice remained steady. "He's lying," he whispered to Melissa. "I've never seen him at the site." Rebecca Collins, ever quick to act, passed a note to Daniel Perez. Rising for cross-examination, Daniel revealed inconsistencies in the witness's testimony, questioning his employment dates and location details. "Could you point out on this map where you claim to have worked?" Daniel asked. The witness pointed confidently. But before he could say more, Jason's hand shot up, clutching one of his sketches. Daniel nodded encouragingly. "Your Honor," he said, "I'd like to present Exhibit 47, Jason Whitman's detailed sketch of the actual dumping site. It includes landmarks that weren't there during the dates this witness claims to have worked." The witness's composure cracked as the sketch was displayed. Jason's drawing showed a distinctive water tower that had only been constructed 6 months ago. Yet the witness had claimed to have left the company 2 years earlier. Andrew Keller's face reddened with frustration as he produced a stack of documents, employee records, safety reports, and inspection certificates. "These records prove our compliance," he declared. Rebecca Collins stepped forward, determination etched on her face. "Your Honor, we can prove these documents are forgeries." She projected enlarged images of the paperwork, highlighting inconsistent letterheads and mismatched dates. Melissa rose, her voice carrying across the hushed courtroom. "What we're seeing here is not just about false documents or coach witnesses. This is about powerful men who believe they can buy or bury the truth. My grandson," she placed a protective hand on Jason's shoulder, "has shown more integrity in his 10 years than Keller Corporation has in its entire existence." When Jason took the stand for cross-examination, Keller's attorney attacked aggressively. "Isn't it true that you're simply seeking attention? That these drawings are products of imagination?" Jason remained calm, his small fingers tracing the details in his sketchbook. "No, sir. Every drawing shows exactly what I saw. Like this one, he said, holding up a detailed sketch. It shows the serial numbers on the barrels your company dumped. The same numbers Mom wrote down in her diary before she died. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Keller's attorney faltered, unprepared for such specific evidence from a child. Jason continued, pointing out details in his drawings, dates, locations, truck numbers, all of which matched the evidence Rebecca and Daniel had uncovered. Through it all, Melissa watched her grandson with pride. The truth was coming to light. And no matter how hard Keller Corporation fought, the lies were unraveling. The courtroom fell silent as Marcus Chun, Keller Corporation's former vice president of operations, shifted uncomfortably in the witness chair. Daniel approached, holding a small electronic device. Mr. Chun, during your tenure at Keller Corporation, did you make any recordings of meetings with Mr. Keller? Andrew Keller's face drained of color as his lawyers immediately objected, but the judge overruled them. Yes, Chun admitted in a whisper. I recorded several meetings over the past 2 years. Jason squeezed Melissa's hand as they watched. Rebecca leaned forward, ready to take notes. Daniel continued, Your Honor, we like to enter these recordings as evidence. He held up the device. Mr. Chun provided these to us voluntarily. Keller's legal team erupted in protest. These recordings were made without consent. They're inadmissible. The judge raised her hand for silence. Mr. Chun, why did you record these meetings? I knew what we were doing was wrong, Chun replied, his shoulders slumping. The chemical dumping, the bribes to officials, the cover-ups. I needed proof. Daniel played the first recording. Andrew Keller's voice filled the courtroom, clear and unmistakable. I don't care about the safety reports. Bury those wherever you can. If anyone asks questions, we know which officials to call. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as Jason's eyes widened. He recognized the locations mentioned in the recordings, the same places he had drawn in his sketches. Another recording revealed Keller discussing bribes to double the usual payment to a judge. We need that environmental impact study buried, Keller's voice said. Keller's attorneys frantically argued about wiretapping laws and privacy violations, but the judge remained firm. These recordings were made by a participant in the conversations, which is legal in this state. The evidence stands. Andrew Keller sat rigid, knowing his empire was crumbling. Thanks to the unwavering truth that had been uncovered, one drawing at a time. Daniel Perez sat in his chair, his trademark confidence crumbling as his own words condemned him. The recordings continued, each one revealing more damning evidence of environmental crimes and corruption. When the final recording ended, the courtroom remained deathly silent. Rebecca Collins caught Melissa's eye and nodded slowly, a silent understanding passing between them. They both knew this was the turning point they had been waiting for. Daniel Perez turned back to face Mr. Chun. Mr. Chun, why did you come forward now? He asked, his voice betraying the tension in the room. Chun glanced at Jason before answering, his voice breaking as he spoke. Because that boy's mother tried to stop this. She saw what was happening and tried to protect people. He paused, his voice faltering before he continued, and they silenced her. The judge's gavel cracked through the stunned silence. The recordings will remain in evidence, she declared firmly, ending Keller's last attempt to suppress the truth. The next morning, the courtroom was packed with people, their faces etched with anxiety and hope as families began sharing their stories. Sarah Martinez, a mother of 3, was the first to take the stand. Her hands trembled as she held up a photograph of her youngest daughter. This is Emily, before the cancer took her, she said, her voice breaking. We lived next to Keller's dumping site for 5 years. We didn't know the water was poisoned. Behind Andrew Keller, who sat with his jaw clenched, the weight of his guilt began to settle in. Melissa watched, her heart heavy, as more families came forward. Each testimony was more heartbreaking than the last. James Thompson, an elderly man using a walker, described how his wife developed severe respiratory problems. "We lost everything," he said, wiping his eyes. "Our home, our health, our dignity." As the testimonies continued, Jason sat quietly beside Melissa, his pencil moving across his sketchbook. His eyes darted between the families and his drawing, capturing something only he could see, a silent, powerful tribute to their pain and resilience. Maria Rodriguez stood, clutching medical bills. "My children can't play outside anymore," she said. "The doctors say their lungs are damaged, and still, Keller Corporation told us everything was safe." The air in the courtroom grew heavy with emotion. Even the reporters stopped writing, captivated by the raw pain in each story. Rebecca Collins noticed several jurors dabbing at their eyes, visibly moved by the testimonies. When the last family finished speaking, Jason tugged at Melissa's sleeve. He held up his sketchbook, revealing a powerful drawing that took her breath away. It depicted the families standing together, their faces filled with strength and determination. Behind them stood Melissa, and in the center was Jason's mother, her spirit watching over them all. Daniel Perez asked permission to share the drawing with the court. As it was passed around, gasps and murmurs filled the room. The image captured everything words couldn't express: the pain, the unity, and the unwavering hope for justice. "This is what we're fighting for," Melissa said softly, pulling Jason close. "This is what your mother wanted." The drawing made its way to the jury box, where each juror studied it carefully. One elderly juror removed her glasses, visibly moved by the artistic testimony of a 10-year-old boy who had lost so much but still saw beauty and unity. Andrew Keller's confident facade finally cracked as he watched the impact of Jason's art ripple through the courtroom. The families, once isolated in their suffering, now stood together, drawing strength from each other and from the young artists who had given their struggle a face. The courthouse hallway buzzed with nervous energy as the jury deliberated. Melissa paced back and forth, her usually composed demeanor betraying her anxiety. Jason sat on a wooden bench, his sketchbook open but untouched. "It's been 4 hours," Daniel Perez said, checking his watch. "That could be good or bad." Rebecca Collins stood by the window, her notebook clutched tightly. "The evidence is solid," she said. "They can't ignore it." When the bailiff finally called everyone back into the courtroom, the tension was palpable. The displaced families filed in, holding hands and whispering prayers. Andrew Keller straightened his tie, maintaining his air of superiority. Even now, the judge asked the jury foreman to stand. The entire room held its breath. "On the count of environmental violations, how do you find?" "Guilty." A collective gasp filled the room. "On the count of bribery?" "Guilty." Melissa's hand found Jason's, squeezing it gently. "On the count of fraudulent practices?" "Guilty." The courtroom erupted in cheers. Tears streamed down faces as families embraced each other. Melissa pulled Jason into a tight hug, her own eyes welling up with tears. Andrew Keller's face turned ashen as 2 officers approached with handcuffs. His smug smile finally crumbled when the cold metal clicked around his wrists. As they led him away, he caught Jason's eye for the first time. The mighty CEO, once so powerful, now looked small and defeated. The judge announced immediate compensation for the affected families, her voice strong and unwavering. Furthermore, Keller Corporation's assets will be frozen pending a full investigation. The families surged forward, surrounding Melissa and Jason. Sarah Martinez hugged them both, sobbing, "Thank you. Thank you," over and over. James Thompson raised his walker in celebration, his weathered face beaming with joy. Maria Rodriguez lifted her children up to see Andrew Keller being escorted out. "Look," she told them, "the bad man can't hurt anyone anymore." Daniel Perez shook hands with Rebecca Collins, both of them grinning widely. "Justice," he said simply. She nodded, too overwhelmed for words. In the midst of the celebration, Jason opened his sketchbook. While everyone watched, he added one final detail to his drawing of the united families. The smiles on every face, including his own, The morning sun cast long shadows across the cemetery as Melissa and Jason walked hand in hand between the rows of headstones. A gentle breeze rustled through the autumn leaves, carrying the sweet scent of fresh flowers. Melissa clutched a bouquet of white lilies, her daughter's favorite. They stopped at a simple granite headstone. Melissa's hands trembled as she knelt down, carefully arranging the flowers. "I should have come sooner," Melissa whispered, her fingers tracing the engraved letters of her daughter's name. "I was too proud, too stubborn." Her voice cracked with emotion. Jason stood close by, his sketchbook tucked under his arm. "She used to tell me stories about you," he said softly, "about how strong you were in court, how you always fought for what was right." Tears rolled down Melissa's cheeks. "I wasn't strong when it mattered most. I let my career become more important than family." She turned to Jason, her eyes filled with regret and love. "But I promise you, Jason, I won't make that mistake again. You're my family, and I'll always be here for you." Jason leaned into her embrace, his own tears falling onto the pages of his sketchbook. They sat together in peaceful silence, sharing memories and healing old wounds. Later that afternoon, the community center buzzed with activity. Tables laden with home-cooked food lined the walls, and Jason's drawings were displayed prominently on bulletin boards. The families who had fought alongside them against Keller Corporation mingled and laughed, their relief and joy palpable. Sarah Martinez stood before one of Jason's sketches, a powerful drawing of the courthouse during their victory. "These drawings," she said, wiping away happy tears, "they tell our story. They show what we fought for." Melissa watched as Jason moved through the crowd, accepting hugs and praise from the community members. His shy smile grew more confident with each interaction. Maria Rodriguez's children crowded around him, begging him to teach them how to draw. James Thompson raised his glass of lemonade to Jason. "To the art," he called out, "whose art gave us courage." The room erupted in cheers and applause. Jason blushed, retreating to Melissa's side. She wrapped an arm around his shoulders, feeling a deep sense of pride and belonging. The warmth of the community surrounded them, a testament to the bonds forged through their shared struggle. "Look what you've done," Melissa whispered to Jason, gesturing to the celebrating families. "You've helped bring healing to so many people." Months passed, and spring brought new beginnings to the courthouse where it had all started. The same room that once witnessed heated battles now held a different kind of emotion as Judge Sarah Peterson finalized Jason's adoption. Melissa's hands trembled as she signed the papers, her signature making official what her heart had known for months. "Congratulations," Judge Peterson announced warmly. "Jason is now legally your son." Jason's eyes sparkled with tears of joy as he hugged Melissa tightly. The small group of witnesses, Rebecca Collins, Daniel Perez, and several community members, broke into applause. That evening, the community center buzzed with celebration. Colorful streamers hung from the ceiling, and tables overflowed with home-cooked dishes. Children played tag between the chairs, while adults shared stories and laughter. Maria Rodriguez had organized a wall display of Jason's drawings, chronicling their journey from darkness to light. Each sketch told a piece of their story: the courthouse battles, the community's unity, the triumph of justice. In the middle of the festivities, Jason tugged at Melissa's sleeve. "I have something for you," he said shyly, holding a carefully wrapped package. The room fell quiet as Melissa unwrapped the gift. Her breath caught as she revealed Jason's latest drawing, a portrait of herself, not as the stern judge she once was, but smiling warmly, her eyes filled with love. At the bottom, in careful letters, he had written, "My hero." Tears welled in Melissa's eyes as she pulled Jason close. The community gathered around them, sharing in their joy. Rebecca Collins captured photos of their precious moments together, Melissa helping Jason with his homework at their kitchen table, the two of them planting flowers in their garden, walks in the park where Jason sketched while Melissa read legal briefs. In Melissa's home office, now brightened by Jason's artwork, She shared stories about famous court cases and the importance of standing up for what's right. Jason listened intently, his sketchbook always ready to capture these moments of learning and love. They stood together by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Melissa's arm wrapped around Jason's shoulders, their shadows merging into one as they faced their future together. Not alone, but strengthened by their bond and the love of their community. If you enjoyed the story of Judge Melissa and Jason, I've handpicked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss it. Click here to watch it.